Hello everybody, this is QuickScript Creations bringing you yet another Jurassic Park toy related video, and today we're going to be talking about 10 of the most expensive Jurassic Park toys. Some of these toys are more readily available than others. They're quite frequently, available on eBay and things like that, and then other ones are a lot more rare and a lot more difficult, if not near impossible to obtain. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So at number 10 is the Quints, or aka the Firebeak bird. This was available during the Jurassic Park Wave 2, the original 1993 line. This figure, it's pretty interesting. It was later actually retooled into a pterodon figure for the Lost World, and I believe the only main difference is the head sculpt was different. But this one sells for around $100 loose, and that's typically with all of its accessories. And then mint in box, I think I saw one sell recently for like $250. So it's not that expensive of a figure. If you want to actually get your hands on this one, like I said, getting a loose one is fairly cheap. I've even seen them sell for under $100. It really depends on how lucky you are and, how often you frequent places like eBay and other auction sites, because you can come across really good deals. But yeah, this one, not a super rare figure, but still surprisingly pricey compared to a lot of the older Kenner stuff. Number 9 is the Chaos Effect Thrasher TRex. This was, of course, a repaint of the original Lost World Thrasher TRex, and this one's just a little bit more rare than the Lost World ones because I think it had a much limited release and not as many of them were made. And the whole Chaos Effect line in general is just sort of rare, especially finding mint in box ones. I was actually bidding on one of these recently, but it ended up selling for around like $200, and that was a loose one. Box ones probably can fetch as much as $400 to $500. I've seen some floating around on eBay with buy it now prices for $600 to $700, which is way too much. And yeah, a loose one, like I said, it's gonna cost you at least, maybe if you're lucky, $150, or high end $200, and then mint and box one's probably gonna be double that. So still not that expensive of a figure if you are really a die-hard fan and you want to get your hands on one of these. They do pop up every so often. Still a pretty rare figure, and rather expensive too. For number 8, I'm going with the Chaos Effect Mobile Command Center. This is again another repaint of a Lost World playset. The Mobile Command Center like we see in the film, the trailer, real iconic vehicle. This was a repaint that was released a few years later, and this thing is just extremely rare. I go on eBay at least once, twice a day, and I only see one of these pop up maybe every like 3 months. One I just saw recently, I believe, was mint in box and sold for over $500. It was right around $500 last time I checked it. It could have sold for more. That's still quite a lot of money, and considering how unfrequently I actually see these things, it is a very rare piece. It doesn't seem to sell for as much as I expected, but still, $500 for a mint in box one, that's still a lot of money. Way more than, the Quints and the Thrasher TRex that I just mentioned sell for. And I think the main reason a lot of people maybe don't want this figure or this playset is because of how big it is, and it does take up so much room. So really only the super die-hard, enthusiastic Jurassic Park collectors are probably going to be seeking this thing out, and that's probably why it doesn't sell for quite as much as I expect. Now for number 7 and 6, I'm actually going to kind of combine them, because what I found while I was trying to research these figures is that their prices are quite similar. The Lost World Carnotaurus and the Demon Carnotaurus. What I found is the Lost World Carnotaurus actually seems a little bit more rare. Not necessarily selling for a whole lot more than the Demon Carnotaurus, but when I go on places like eBay, I find quite a few of the Demon Carnotauruses complete, and then, you have the mint and box ones that are selling for like $1,500 that no one's buying. Realistically, the mint and box Demon Carnotaurus is probably going to sell anywhere from, $500 to $800, unless they're, you know, the AFA graded type, then perhaps, you know, they are worth that much. Like I said, the Lost World one, it's a little bit more rare. I only see like one of them at a time on eBay, and then, you know, they're way overpriced, like over $1,000. Realistically, you know, I think a mint in box one could sell for around the same price as the Demon Carnotaurus, anywhere, you know, from maybe 300 on the very low end to as high as, you know, 700 maybe for someone that's really, you know, that in need of one and really desperate enough to spend that kind of money. But the loose ones, you can get Demon Carnotauruses for around 100 or a little over, a little under. It all depends on the accessories they come with. Are they complete or incomplete? And the same for the Lost World Carnotaurus. I've seen them, you know, sell for around 200 complete, or less than that if they're missing their battle damage and stuff. But the reason I combine these two figures is they are so similar and their prices are very similar, and it was just really hard to find a definite, you know, price on these as for how much they sell for, because the prices are always varying, and it just really depends on, you know, what's available at the time and what people are willing to spend. Since I kind of combined the last two, you know, the Carnotauruses into one, I'll go ahead and add one more figure on here. So for number 6, that'll be the Nick Vanowen Lost World Series 2 figure. One of these just sold for just under $700 recently for a mint in box one. That's absolutely insane. And, you know, the reason I rank this one higher than the Carnotauruses, even though I said, you know, mint in box ones might sell for that much, is because this thing is far more rare than the Carnotauruses. Only one, you know, this is actually the only one I've ever seen a mint in box one on eBay. There's some loose ones for, you know, the asking price is like 300. So far, you know, no one's paid that much. I think the people that are really interested in this one are the diehard collectors, and of course they're going to want a mint in box one. And from what I've seen, you know, getting a mint in box one's going to fetch you a lot of money, you know, almost $1,000 basically for one of these things. And that's just mind-blowing to me. But you know, it just goes to show you that if, you know, there's really enthusiastic Jurassic Park collectors out there willing to pay just about anything to get their hands on the rarest, you know, of rare toys out there. So for number 5, I wasn't really sure whether to, you know, make this one number 6 or not, but that's the infrared Spinosaurus. This thing is probably one of the rarest of all the Jurassic Park 3 figures that were ever made. It is very similar in price with the Nick Vanowen figure. That's why I said I wasn't really sure which one to rank 6 and which one to rank 5, but this one's equally as rare in my opinion. It sells for, I think one of the last ones sold for about $700, but I've heard, you know, it could sell for maybe even 800 or 900 mints in box. It really all depends. Again, this is a piece that only the most, you know, enthusiastic and passionate Jurassic Park collectors are gonna seek out, because, you know, your average collector, casual collector, they're not gonna pay $700 for a figure that doesn't even look that great. The reason, you know, this one's so expensive is because of its rarity, not necessarily because of how cool it is or how great it looks, because it definitely isn't that great looking of a Spinosaurus figure. But, you know, people are paying for the rarity of these things and for the bragging rights, I guess, of owning them. So if you want one of these, like I said, it's going to cost you anywhere from, I'd say maybe if you're lucky, $600 to $800. So number 4 is the Desert Spinosaurus. This was supposed to be released with the Camo Extreme line, but all the figures sort of had a limited release, and this one was actually canceled. There's only known to be one of these in existence, although I believe someone tried to come out and say they knew of a second one existing in a magazine article or something like that, but so far there's no evidence of that. The last this thing was ever seen for sale was in 2002, and back then it sold for $700, and it wasn't actually expected to be that rare back then. I think some people were still under the impression that the figure was eventually going to be released, or at least that's what I read. They didn't know it was going to be canceled at the time, but of course it did eventually end up getting canceled. So the 2002 auction that sold for $700 is really the only known one to actually have ever sold. And that was, you know, back about 16 years ago now. So I can only imagine that if this thing were to reappear in an auction, it would sell for, you know, double, triple, maybe even quadruple than that. The sky's really the limit because, you know, like I've been saying, there are a lot of avid Jurassic Park collectors out there, people with a lot of money, toy collectors who are willing to pay outrageous prices for the most rare, you know, toys ever made. So number 3 is actually part of a canceled line. It was supposed to be called Chaos Effect Night Hunters, and it was supposed to follow the Chaos Effect line, which did of course get a release, but this one, the entire line was canned before it ever, you know, saw the light of day. And the special gimmick with these figures was that they were going to be like glow in the dark, which is actually a really cool idea. So I was sort of disappointed that it got canceled, even though a lot of the figures were just repaints of previous figures we've already had. But this one just sold recently. I believe it was this year. If I'm wrong, I'll go ahead and add the correct information on the screen. But it sold for $4,000. The buy it now price was set to $5,000, but from what I read online, it sold for only $4,000. But that information could be wrong. But still, $4,500. $4,000, $5,000. That's still a ton of money for one figure. And this figure isn't even that unique in itself. This is just a repainted version of the 1993 pterodactyl, and it includes a couple little hatchlings with it. But, you know, the reason it fetches that much money is because this is a prototype figure, you know, and the only one to actually be known to exist. So whoever has this in their collection, you know, essentially has one of the holy grails of the Jurassic Park figures. So it's definitely something unique and cool to have. I can't imagine paying that much for it myself unless I was, you know, a millionaire, I suppose. But that's still a ton of money, but not quite the most expensive figure on this list. So number 2, I went with the Lost World prototype Triceratops figures. Now these things are actually a lot more common than the previous figure that I mentioned. There's quite a few of them that have been sold at auctions, so perhaps it's not as rare, but I feel like this one is a little bit more interesting and perhaps something that a lot of Jurassic Park collectors would be more interested in having, simply because it's such a unique mold. And the Pterodon figure, yeah, sold for $4,000, but it is essentially just a repackaged figure. Now in 2012, a pair of these sold for about $2,000. The lot itself sold for $6,000, but the two figures themselves were, you know, valued at $2,000 essentially. And one of them was just the unpainted version, one was actually a painted version. So it's really interesting to think that, you know, two different types actually exist, just not. Now, considering that, you know, this was sold over 5 years ago for that much, and I believe myself that the market for Jurassic Park stuff has increased with the release of, you know, new films and things like that, I would have to say I believe these figures should sell for a little bit more than that nowadays. Maybe even, you know, $3,000 to $4,000 like the Pterodon that I mentioned. I could be wrong about that, but just considering, I think these figures, while there may be more of them available out there, I still feel like they're far more unique and willing to fetch, you know, a higher price than the Pterodon figure. And since we haven't seen one of these go to auction since 2012, it's really hard to put a price on it. But I have to say that at least I believe that it would sell for more. But it's, you know, it's really hard to say with these things because the prices are constantly going up. But the problem is they're not always available, so we can't always see how much, you know, people are willing to spend for them. Now finally, at number 1 is yet another unreleased figure. This is part of the Night Hunter series that I already mentioned, and this is the Pachycephalosaurus with the Aj figure. Both of these are repaints, but like I said, the gimmick with these was that they were glow in the dark and just, you know, repackaged, repainted figures. But one of these just sold recently within the last year to 2 years for $12,100. Yeah, $12,000 for one figure, and that is just absolutely insane. I can't imagine who was willing to spend that much money. I would have had to have been, you know, a serious collector. But I'm just actually astounded by that price. I only recently heard about this auction within the last few months, and I've been wanting to make a video on it just because of how insane it is, and how little was actually known about this line of figures, you know. What's really intriguing to me about a lot of the Jurassic Park figures, especially the unreleased ones, is just like the mystery surrounding them, and we don't really know how many of them exist or how many of them, you know, never made it beyond a concept stage. And it's really cool and interesting to see these figures just appear out of the blue, and then even more interesting to see how much people are willing to spend for them. I can't imagine myself ever spending that much for one figure, but it is really awesome to see these things in existence and to know that they're more than just, you know, myths. Anyways guys, that does it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. I tried my best to get the most accurate price range for a lot of these figures, but some of them are a little bit more difficult to put a price tag on because it really all depends on what a person's willing to spend for a certain figure. Some of them, like the Night Hunter Aj figure, you know, we have evidence of exactly what it sells for. But then again, there's other figures like the Carnotauruses where the prices are just always changing, and it really, again, depends on what someone's willing to spend for it. So, but anyways, I just want to thank everyone for subscribing and for liking and commenting on my videos. It really means a lot. And if you haven't already, I recommend you check out my recent video I just released a few days ago. It's part of the Jurassic Frontier toy series that I'm doing. I think you guys will really enjoy it. But in the meantime, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you later.